Good afternoon, everyone. I am Luke Tannen, Executive Director of Chicago Innovation, and I want to welcome all of you today to our first event of 2021, a year in which Chicago Innovation is celebrating its 20th anniversary. Whew, Tom, 20 years, can you believe that? And that event today is called Space versus Place, How Your World is Being Redesigned. Now, with every new year comes a sense of new possibilities. And as we kick off this year, we want to focus not only on how Chicago can rebuild, but on how we can reinvent and redesign. And so we've got a great group of experts who are here today, and they're going to give us that blueprint that we need. Now, if you have a question for the panel, please send it to us via the Zoom Q&A, which is a separate function from the chat, which will also be active. We also received questions from many of you in advance, and we'll have those on hand too. We plan to spend the last 15 minutes or so for audience Q&A. And in addition, keep an eye out for a couple of polling questions because we want to hear from you, your perspective, the audience. And lastly, there will be optional networking from 4 to 4:15 in breakout rooms following the panel. So before we get started, I want to thank our year-round Chicago Innovation sponsors who support us in everything that we do and help build this fantastic innovation community. They include our diamond sponsors, SMS Assist, Accenture, Wintrust, and Walgreens. Gold sponsors, Comcast Business and Exelon. Silver sponsor, Vetter Price. Bronze sponsors, Crown Castle, LK, Thompson Coburn, Granger, and Energy BBDO. And our media partners, Intersection, Clear Channel Outdoor, WBBM News Radio, NBC Chicago, and Crane's Chicago Business. Next, I'm going to hand it off for a quick word from the co-founder of Chicago Innovation and president of Kuzmarski Innovation, Tom Kuzmarski.
Thanks, Luke. Hey, it's wonderful to be with all of you today, and happy 2021. I hope that you're all healthy and energized and optimistic. I know I am this year. Well, today's topic is one that we've talked about quite a little bit, and it's really about rebuilding. And innovators in particular are great at redesigning. So today's topic is really about how our perceptions have changed as it relates to space versus place. I know mine have. Today, we have the great honor of having moderate this panel, our good friend and leader in the innovation community, Shivani Vora. Shivani is the head and the chief innovation officer for Accenture North America. She has over 20 years of international experience in growth strategy and digital transformation and leads the innovation hubs. She's a member of the Economic Club of Chicago and, importantly, a Chicago Innovation Board member. Shivani, welcome, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Tom, for that wonderful, warm welcome. Excited to spend some time today on this really relevant topic as people start to make plans to get back into offices, or maybe not. I, for one, am perfectly fine making the beach my new office spot. All right, let me start by introducing our esteemed panel members today. Tapi Sadiku, Global Head of Digital Employee Experience, the Kraft Heinz Company. Tapi's focus is to increase employee productivity and creativity with the use of technology. With a background in finance, economics, psychology, and technology, she integrates academic knowledge and practical experience to drive profitability in a conscientious manner. We also have the honor of joining us, Eric Gannon, Studio Director, Principal at Gensler. Eric is Chicago's workplace design leader at the 6,000 plus person global architecture firm that was selected one of Fast Company's most innovative companies in 2019. We have Lynn Osmond, President and CEO of Chicago Architecture Center. Lynn leads the world-renowned Chicago Architecture Center, which attracts 690,000 annual visitors and offers 85 tours of Chicago's distinct locations. And we also have Adrian Harbanger, design lead at CBRE Design. Adrian was a key member of the design team for the McDonald's Global Headquarters, which won the 2018 Interior Design Best of the Year Award. Other office projects include LinkedIn, Amazon, and Bank of America. So thank you for each of you for taking time from your busy schedule and joining us today. Paul, before we get started, how about we make this a bit interactive and engage our audience by asking them a question? There you go. So the first question we'd like to start off with is a poll to get to know our audience a bit. What sector does everybody work in? Give it a few minutes out here. Can we see the results, Paul? We've almost half of our audience today is in corporate. And then what is interesting is it's an even split of about 11 to 12% between not-for-profit, university, startup, and a little more for other. So with that, I think this is a good breakdown of the folks that we have on the call today. Let's start our discussion maybe by asking each of our panelists a simple question. In 30 seconds, can each of you share how do you define the difference between space and place? And maybe Tapi, maybe we start with you first.
Perfect, thanks Shivani. And by the way, if I was to think about space versus place, I actually like the idea of the beach. I think that should be the new office. But anyway, when I think of place and space, actually place for me tends to be quite rigid, bound, and quite finite. However, what I love about the concept of space is that it's like a fluid expanse that occupies whatever it needs to at any given time. It makes me think, well, how can you achieve objectives irrespective of your physical location? I like the idea of separating the difference between your physical location and the objective that you're trying to achieve. When I look up to the stars and I look at the cosmos, I think it is whatever it needs to be at any one point in time.
Beautiful, that's fantastic. Eric, would love to hear your thoughts on the same question, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you came from the world of architectural education, you've studied lots of spaces. You're forced to really kind of understand the mechanics, the layout, really the flow through the space. But really, place, I think, has a lot more of a purpose, a value, the human experience, a quotient that really, I think, makes us remember spaces the way that we do. So I really think place associates with memory. It associates with things that are far more experiential.
Wonderful. Lynn, what about you?
I think place is really about the emotional connection that you have to a place. So space is abstract, it's undefined. It's what you have before function and people define it as place. So you kind of rent out office space, but then your memories of that space are because of what you experience at the colleagues, the functions, the way it's designed. So place becomes more of a destination.
Very succinct, lovely. And Adrian, would love to hear your thoughts, please.
Yeah, so mine is really going to echo what Lynn just said. So for me, space is tangible and it's measurable, while place is what is abstract. So I design spaces, but without human interaction, they're just that, they're just spaces. So it's our connection to them and that feeling that we get when we're in a space that really turn them into places.
Wonderful, great definitions and explanations there in 30 seconds. So in essence, what I'm hearing is a place can be seen as a space that has meaning. So can each of you share with us, maybe this time we start with you, Adrian. What are some spaces, physical or virtual, that are personally meaningful to you? And what makes them special? What makes them that way for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if I was asked this question a year ago, my answer would probably be very different. But for me right now, my home is everything to me. So it's my office, it's my gym, it's my kids' school. And that is what is making it so special. It's both my space and my place right now. And it's not very often, I think, prior to this, that those two things maybe intersected.
That's exactly right, right? We are not working from home. We are at home working is what the pandemic has done to us, right? Eric, would love your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think in the past, I probably would have focused a lot on heavily designed spaces, spaces that really had a really defined purpose. Now I was thinking back, and I love the notion of pop-ups, and I love the notion of spaces that are very impromptu, almost unplanned. Those are the ones that stick in my memory more, almost the one that I can recall every detail. So I think that's pretty telling, is it's not about necessarily designing everything to the fine detail. It's more about what you can create and foster within the space.
That's great. Tapi, your comments on that? Something so meaningful to you?
Yeah, sure. And actually, for me, when I thought of this question, I realized that in both circumstances, pre and during COVID, I would still say the same thing. So for me, exercise is so important. And if you were to ask me a year ago, Toppy, where's your most important place? I would say the gym. 5 a.m. in the morning when it's dark and no one else is around and I can get in the zone. Actually, now that still mental space is so important to me. However, it speaks to what I was talking about earlier about this defragmentation between the objective and the means or the mode. So for me, it's that mental space in my mind when I'm working out first thing in the morning. It gives me life, energy, and motivation. And I think for me, it's evolved into these like mental spaces that we can create for ourselves.
Great, fantastic. Lynn, what are your thoughts on this?
I think the place that has become most important to myself and my husband is our local neighborhood park, Mary Beltrami Park in the West Loop. It's the only place where we feel a sense of community, because we're really all individually, we're isolated, we're in our Zoom calls. And when we go to the park, there's the dogs, there's the, people, families sitting on a hill, enjoying each other. So it's that sense of the knitting together of the vibrancy of the community that makes you feel connected. That's so important to us right now.
That's great, Lynn. It's very nice to hear how some of these spaces have special meanings to each of you, right? And Lynn, to your point of the park, what does having a sense, why does having a sense of place really matter, right? So the park that you talk about, what are the consequences of losing this, especially what we've observed and experienced over the past year? Would love to hear your thoughts on that, Lynn.
Well, I think what's happened over the past year, we've become individuals rather than being a collective. And so what I'm gravitating to is something that is green and outdoors, and it's a spiritual space, but it's that sense of connectivity and that collective, because we don't have it in the same way in our office space. And whether that be collectively sitting in the office, going into the lobby, being in that urban space. So it's redefining it. And I think that loss of connectivity is something that is really, we're struggling with it by this stage in the pandemic. And only place can really connect us.
You're absolutely right. And throughout this pandemic, right, it's the connectivity, but then also it's more has come into focus on how people respond mentally to actually being isolated. So Eric, maybe this one's for you. How should designers of the future incorporate emotional well-being into their vision of the spaces that we work in?
Yeah, I think you started to see it happening prior to the pandemic, where we were realizing that a lot of our work environments weren't working the way that they should. And I think there's, what does that mean? It means that there's however many people are contained within that space have a different expectation, a different need set personally. And I think right now, going back and really supporting, the well-being of others, those environments need to do something similar to what we're experiencing now, which is as tough as it is, you're working in the way that you want to work, you're working in a way that's comfortable to you. I know that's a big fear about returning to work, is that you don't have the same support system, the same comforts that support you as a unique individual. So I think that's the important part, is that right now I think we had environments that were viable, they were passable, they were okay, but we really need to support an environment of vitality and one that really celebrates presence and authenticity. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I think it's a great moment for us to reset and go back into work environments that really do support the individual.
Great point. Support the individual, create that connectivity, create that fiber of the base that makes us human, right? But in recent years, there's actually been a focus on creating spaces that fuel creativity. You've seen so many of the innovation labs, co-working spaces, for example, that have popped up. Toppy, how have you replicated this virtually for craft employees? What's been your approach to creating inviting, idea generating virtual spaces in the wake of the global pandemic?
I think with the COVID pandemic, there were like three big themes that I saw. There was the democratization of knowledge, power, and technology. And what that facilitated was the idea of, okay, what is this foundation that we will create? You know, previously in physical offices, you had power and you had huge power symbols. So people had offices, you had innovation teams who would ideate in specific spaces. However, with the whole democratization of technology, it allowed us to say, what is this technological infrastructure that we can create where information can flow, fluid, where we can keep employees in the flow of work, where we can create spaces where people and teams can spin in and out of business projects and achieve business objectives. So I'm sure most on the call will be able to relate. We pushed a collaborative tool out now. We're a large scale enterprise. We pushed out Microsoft Teams. But more than it just being a technical deployment, we then began to focus on the digital behaviors that employees would need to be effective in that space. So for me, there was one thing around creating space and technology that enabled people to remain in the flow of work and remain fluid, removing the friction from work. And then the second thing is around these digital behaviors and this mindset and the methodology that people would need to be effective in this new space.
That's a great point, Tapi, right? And you and I have talked quite often about the concept of innovation mindsets, innovation behaviors, and that actually transcends beyond just having an innovative culture and having these spaces, having these places that fuel that creativity is also so important, especially in post-pandemic when we get back, right? There should be a reason for why folks feel attracted to want to go to a particular place to work with others.
Yeah, you're so right. I think it's more than just a technical deployment, right? Hand in hand, you have to think about the behaviors. What does it take to be effective in that space? You're right about that innovation mindset. What are we encouraging and how are we educating people to think differently about achieving old things in new ways, or actually just achieving new things in new ways? But people need to feel empowered, and then they also need the technology to be able to support them to deliver that.
Great, wonderful. Paul, this has been a great start to our discussion. Maybe we engage the audience a bit more, ask them another question over here. What physical space are you in right now? Well, maybe Tapi's at the gym, but I don't see her working out.
Yeah.
I don't think Lynn is in the park, but I'm probably sure that's where she'd like to be. Give it a couple more minutes to see the scores. Great. I don't know why I use the word score. It's not really a score. Sorry about that. A home. Yes, look at that. 84% of us, including me, are at home. I am surprised that 10% are in the office or in the workspace. Hopefully we see that number start to grow or change in that maybe the concept of the office or the workspace changes as we're talking about right now. We've got a few single digit ones who are mobile and commuting or in their secondary homes. But yes, as I mentioned earlier, right, we are all at home working. That's great. All right, so in anticipation of bringing our employees back into newly evolved workspaces, we are already seeing companies turn their attention to the outdoors in response to the pandemic. For example, the Aon Center Plaza just made a $6.5 million investment in outdoor build-outs. Adrian, would love to hear from you, and then Eric, get your perspective as well on this topic of how do you see the outdoors factoring into your future designs? What will make people want to engage with physical spaces?
Yeah, so I think this desire to have outdoor space is not necessarily a new one, right? Especially here in Chicago, we want to be outside as much as humanly possible for the 2.5 months that the weather allows us to do it. And we've already seen, a big investment in the city in particular, just along the riverfront over the last couple of years in these outdoor spaces. But the pandemic has done two things that I'm seeing. It's propelled our need to have these healthy spaces above everything else. And then it's also in the workplace in particular, forced us to kind of rethink this idea of what people need to be productive at work and what they're going to be looking for when they return to work. And these outdoor spaces are ticking boxes on both of those things. So they're responding to our need for a healthy workplace. We can literally sit outside and have sunshine and biophilia and fresh air. And they're also becoming a destination where we can work differently. So when I go back into the office, I don't necessarily want to sit in a cubicle in front of a computer because I can do that here. I can do that in my home. So being outside is going to draw me back into the office. Now, I do see that the function for these outdoor spaces is going to need to change and shift a little bit. It's not just going to be a lounge space with a cornhole anymore. They really have to be functional spaces. So it's going to be an extension of our office space, if you will. They need to have power and Wi-Fi, and we're looking at work height tables now, even writable surfaces. They need to be spaces that we can actually work in for longer periods of time outside.
Great, yeah, and I'm sure weather conditions, all of those aspects as well to be taken into consideration there. Eric, from a Gensler viewpoint, right, from a design viewpoint, would love to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, because you think about the Chicago, building stock, and so much of it can't really be hacked to create outdoor. So what do you do in those cases? And there's been some great ones. We've been part of some repositioning work at Willis Tower and Old Post Office, and those we've been able to achieve great outdoor spaces, and they'll hopefully be utilized even more when we all return. But that's not the majority. The majority really is pretty contained. We're going to always have kind of building stock was built for the times, and it might not be today. So certainly the new buildings, what you're seeing going up in Fulton Market and the West Loop, and they're definitely focusing on indoor-outdoor space and stitching green space throughout the entirety of the building. But I think the purpose of green space and outdoor is really to give the occupants control and confidence that they can alter their environment. So the ability to bring outdoor in, whether it means being able to have an operable window, or it means being able to control some aspect of your environment, the temperature, the flow of air, your posture. I mean, those are all elements of wellness that I think ultimately contribute to, psychological safety and comfort. And I think outdoors is the ultimate if you can achieve it. But certainly we'll have a few decades in front of us of working with our existing building stock to be able to, really see more outdoors.
Yeah, and last a week when we were just kind of catching up on this topic, you brought up a very interesting concept of the 15-minute city, right? And would love to hear your thoughts on that. As I kind of was Googling it, I was not aware of this, but I saw some videos from BBC, and very interesting concept. Would love for you to share more on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll share a little bit of what I know. I know there's some of the other panelists also were excited about the concept, but really it's about scaling down. It's about kind of creating what Luna's bringing up with this sort of community aspect. So when you go to work or if you're at home, more of the things you need and the variety of aspects of our everyday are more within 15-minute kind of radius. So that idea is really strong. It's strong from a sustainability standpoint and the carbon footprint idea. But it's also about just tightening up community to understanding that you can go to diverse points, different places to get things that you need. So it really adds variety. And I think it's a really strong concept to allow us to scale as we scale globally and continue to try to find intimacy within an otherwise large, kind of not so intimate world we live in now.
Right, in the concrete jungle that's Chicago. Adrian, do you see the concept of 15-minute city potentially gaining traction in Chicago?
I hope so. I would love to see that. Absolutely.
That's great.
Well, I think also that we see it, as we look at reimagining our downtown, we've got a lot of office stock that might have to be repurposed. And I think Eric got into it to the older building stock. And those buildings may become, different kind of living spaces or different kinds of co-working spaces so that we can reimagine existing buildings into new usages to create a 15-minute city.
Great point, Lynn. And you especially occupy a unique space at the intersection of history, tourism, and design. And as Chicago embarks on this new era of rebuilding, right, what can we learn from our past? How do we retain our uniqueness while embracing the new? And what can we do to ensure that Chicago remains a landmark that draws in people from all over?
Well, I think what's exciting is that Chicago's always excelled at design, innovation, and engineering and innovation. So this is another challenge. Architects would rather work in a square box than on a blank canvas, and having to reimagine. And so this pandemic is really giving us that opportunity. And I look back in the days, around the World's Fair when we had there was a slogan called "I will." And that really led to the reinvention of the World's Fair. And we've used it over the years. And I think we're in another I will moment where we're looking at the innovation that's out there. Much of it was Chicago innovation and the architecture community. We're building buildings all around the world. We're designing cities all around the world. And we really have that opportunity to rethink about Chicago and how we lead. And a trend right now in the building industry, it used to be LEED certification. Now it's healthy building certification. And we can look at how we build the building of the future, whether that be a new building or reimagining one of our old office buildings, and really look at how we use design as a key to reimagining our world, our physical world, and really in many ways our virtual world, because I think that's something that architects will also get into.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just very closely linked to that is the concept of health, right? Especially with COVID and the health concerns. And I know we are opening up for Q&A, shortly in about 15 minutes or so. But related to this, Rick Planos asked a very good question in our Q&A over here of how do you see open office concepts adjusting to the health concerns that have been added from COVID?
I mean, I can introduce, one idea that we're seeing coming up quite a bit. The scaling down of the floor, I mean, much like the 15-minute city response, I guess, you can start to see the floor plate breaking in smaller neighborhoods. We did, I think, from a real estate efficiency standpoint, move towards open floors, thinking that was forcing, spontaneity, the spontaneous interactions. But I think now we're looking at the neighborhood being a smaller unit. Again, I think we all feel safer when we understand the environment we're within. And there is kind of a future, I hate to say it, I don't mean it, a future pandemic sort of idea where should there be kind of an issue in a quadrant, a portion, could we start to, sort of slowly shut down portions of a floor or kind of scale down the floor to more controlled environments or handle it mechanically different. So I think the scale of the neighborhood is something that we'll definitely see more emphasis on, and then supporting the culture of that work in a much more smaller proximity.
Yeah, that's great. And Tapi, would like to hear from you from a corporate standpoint, right? So while some employees can't wait to, in order to go back to the office 5 days a week, I've still got to meet those. I haven't come across any of those yet, but others are hoping for this new work from home all the time reality, that becomes permanent. And yet there is a third group that's desiring like a hybrid model, right? The work from home and in the office. So given these competing desires, Tapi would love to hear from you on how managers can create spaces and places that ensure collaboration amongst all these groups. Mm-hmm. Should leaders dictate that one approach is better than others, mm-hmm. or give employees the power to choose how they'd like to work?
That is like a super, super layered question. And I think it's so cool. I think if anything, the pandemic has taught us is that this whole dictated, you're only productive in the office, and this idea of work-life balance, it's like a rumor. It's it's not real anymore. It doesn't necessarily work and make sense. And actually, when I think about it, especially from in the context of Kraft Heinz, I like to think of the 3 modes of work. I like to think of the idea of, there's the collaborative self where, I have to work with my colleagues, and there's an objective that I'm trying to achieve with other internal and external stakeholders. There's this deep work, focused, independent, very objective, but independent, let's say, independent realm that you would be in. And then the third one is this idea of like an innovative, and hear me out when I'm putting innovation in its own category here. There's this idea of like being creative, innovative, and inspired. And I think we have to rethink what the workspace is here to achieve now. The reality is, I think most people may feel more productive. I mean, pre-COVID, you'd have those days where you work from home and you think, oh my goodness, this was the one day that I actually got work done because I was free from distraction and I was able to focus and really achieve an objective that I tried to achieve. For me, I like to call that deep work, focused work. And the reality is that tends to operate better on an independent solo basis. There's a lot of research that suggests the same. For me, how I would say the office space should be more of a collaborative space. Therefore, it's not like we collaborate 100% of our time, right? So to Rick's question earlier, for me, that's how I would think about rethinking the office space. It should be more of this collaborative, malleable space that can achieve the technology is there to allow people to achieve whatever objective that they need to achieve in that time. People should be given the freedom to do that independent, deep work time, and that can be at home, but I also appreciate that not everybody has the appropriate home setup. And I can imagine a world where the office space has these location or these pods. I've seen some really cool concepts around that for people to focus on that deep work. And then innovation and creativity. I love the poll earlier about where are you? You actually can work as you walk. I when I want to do most of my creative work, I take the dog out and I put my earphones in and I will just walk through the park lane, which is what I loved about what you said about your park. I'll go to Lincoln Park and I came up with some of the best ideas looking at parks, looking at trees and thinking, how do trees share information? Well, how do I replicate that for employees? So to answer your question, I think managers should be cognizant of the fact that, we don't need to manage by observation. People should feel autonomy, they should feel empowered, and they should be purpose driven. And we should be able to create the spaces that permit people to be effective in whatever objective they need to achieve. And I'm really going to push this, but the technology also needs to be able to support that. The technology allows for the scalability and it removes the human error and it allows information to be shared in a seamless manner. It would be cool if like architects and technologists worked hand in hand to rethink what the vacant space in Chicago could look like and also in subsequent locations.
And to that point on the vacant space, Toby, right? I recently read Crane's Chicago Business article that actually projected about 17% of retail space on the Magnificent Mile that may actually end up vacant in 2021. Adrian, from a CBRE perspective, right? How should this vital section of our city be reinvented? How does the health of our downtown landmark actually affect our business ecosystem? And it's interesting, I was just going through the Q&A and somebody asked a question on that, the Michigan Avenue itself is quite deserted. And how should we be thinking about addressing a problem like that?
That's a tough one. So from my perspective, which is straight workplace, we're already seeing at CBRE some of these, what used to be retail spaces, being transformed into co-working spaces as companies are starting to downsize their traditional workplace footprints in response to these things. And they're starting to become more open to where and how their employees work. I think we will still see a rise in this shared co-working space, maybe not in the immediate term, but a year or 2 years down the road, I think we're going to see some more of these types of retail spaces transform into workplace space in addition to other things.
I think we're also going to see the growth of experience in retail. So, who would have ever thought when, I'm sure we all thought like Starbucks is going to build a 4-story roastery. And yet there is a lineup even now during the pandemic to get into it. So, the whole, when you look at the trends in retail, you're looking at a different, not a passive, but an active retail experience. And I think it's a chance for us to again lead with, what are the retail experiences that are very dynamic, that you're seeing a lot already in Asia, and how do we bring some of those concepts here? So I think it's just, again, a transformational time, and Chicago has a chance to lead in that too.
Yeah, so just elaborating a bit on that, Lynn, I'll ask you first, and then any of the other panelists can please add on there. What do you see, and this was one of the questions from our audience, is what do you see as a global strategy for repurposing the regional malls?
You're seeing a lot of gyms happening. And then also, there's some interesting ones. Juan Moreno actually has developed one on the north side that is going to be a affordable housing complex. And I know Gen's experimenting with that too. So how do you bring regional malls into a whole new life that is about they do it well, bringing a collective together in a large space. So what are those activities, which include housing, libraries, gyms, those kind of functions.
Great. Yeah. Eric, anything from your, sorry, Tapi, you were going to.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, Lynn, to that, I've also seen some research on, it's a thing that it's in America, because in the UK, we don't have these huge malls, but nonetheless, people walking around them, almost like a fitness walking track. So you're inside and you're well protected, but there's that idea of the track. And actually, Shivani, your question, it reminded me back to almost quite a long time ago. I worked for Walmart, and I remember we were exploring concepts around dark stores and changing these large scale retail stores into like these factories, almost like how like Amazon warehouses, but how you can have that in the retail space as well. And you still will need the space. I mean, the population is still growing, so you still need to be able to feed the population, but just repurposing it even within the same industry to support this whole move to like online and virtual.
Great. One of the other questions coming from our panelists is, historically inspired by manufacturing, and this is from Dan Heck, a main goal was to minimize distractions, right? Distractions in manufacturing. Is the new space, for the concepts of the new space, are they introducing more risk through the distractions because of what we were talking about in terms of where our folks will be, working? So, if anybody'd like to take that one.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think maybe the pretense is that you're going to work to do focused work. And I think that's ultimately what the new hybrid might point to, is that if you have to do focused work, you probably would choose home. You might choose another environment that isn't there for, the collaborative part of the work environment, or the innovative kind of disruptive, I don't need to be focused or quiet. I think there will have to be moments of that within the workspace. I just see that kind of being kind of reduced in the future, and being more focused on collaborative, amenity, things that you kind of go there for more as destinations, as opposed to going there and seeking out all of those things in one environment.
Yeah, love that. I was also going through the questions that were posed to us before our session started. So several of our members actually sent us by email some questions, and Amina Moro asked something very similar to what you just mentioned, Eric, that as we explore kind of these hybrid options, many employers are actually focusing on in-office and in-home solutions. But are there any better in-between solutions? Remote doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're working from home. So could there be something like a combination of Airbnb meets WeWork, for example? What are your thoughts on that, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting concept. I think the fluidity of space, and the idea that, we used to do these set them and leave them sort of designs. You design your space at the beginning of a lease term, and you'd let it sit for 10 to 15 years, and then you'd revisit it. So I think the notion of Airbnb and the variety that we're introducing might need to be part of our design thinking in the future, where we might not be able to tweak things that quickly, but if you have a set amount of real estate, I think we just all need to commit to maybe revisiting the space more frequently to see how things are working, adjust them. And I think that gets into the Airbnb concept of where you might want to seek out new environments. I don't know how practical that is in the long run. I'm not smart enough to figure that model out, but I do think that we need to just be committed to really assessing the use and the real, are these spaces successful, and then really starting to pivot things out quickly.
Yeah, that's great. Lynn, maybe, yeah.
Sorry, Shivani, may I just add to that? Because Eric, I have to also talk about one of the experiments that I'm running, which is looking at like VR and augmented reality and mixed reality, and saying, oh, hang on, okay, if the physical space cannot keep up, if it can't adapt as quickly as we would like it to, well, what does it look like if we were to work with like VR, AR, mixed reality? That's quite cool. That's in my opinion, where the future is going, where it's who cares about the physical location you're in, but what are we doing in the brain to kind of make people feel they're in a space that we want them to feel like they're in, or that way, all it is that you need to create a graphic. And I think that's probably something that anyway, for me, that's probably where the future is going. And I'm seeing some really cool results from some of the experiments we've been running.
Yeah, and even from the outputs of the experiments, Tabi, it would be good to hear, because you have a background on psychology, right? Charles Chu posted a question and folks, before we continue, please feel free to post more questions in the Q&A section over here of our discussion. I'll pick them up as many as I can and kind of, add to that. But Charles Chu posted a very interesting question that, what do you think are the biggest challenges in the future in the ways that we work and we live that people are currently underestimating or not taking into consideration? So what do we need to be talking more about? And especially, Tabi, from a psychology, a behavioral standpoint, would love to hear your feedback on that.
That's interesting, because I was having this conversation on Sunday, something quite similar, about the fact that the more we move towards technology, the less we forget about human connection. I remember having a theoretical conversation around Zoom, and this idea of the fact that there's like this fatigue you can experience through just continually being on video. But how are you able to assess like the non-verbal cues? Because the human language is quite new. Previously, there was a lot of nonverbal communication. That's how we kind of were able to assess threat, and we were able to assess like meaning. I think what I'm seeing, at least, that we need to remember the importance of that physical human connection. We can't let go of that. I talk a lot about technology, but I don't mean technology in isolation. I was reading some research in China around the fact that they went so far down this technological route that actually they were predicting that they would see declines in their population, because the younger population were just not able to connect with one another. So I don't think we should be so focused on the now. We shouldn't forget about that human connection and the fact that we still need it. I understand we are in a situation of a pandemic, but that's even why we talk about it being physical distancing rather than social distancing. So for me, that idea of like well-being, taking time for the self, remembering, like thinking about your mind, thinking about what inspires you, what gives you energy I think we should always remember well-being and the mind and that human connection.
Yeah, great points over there, Tabi. Lynn, it would be good to get your feedback given your experience. Danielle Valentino asked this question, that what are your thoughts on hybrid conferences and events consisting of some attendees on site or for in-person meetings, and then some others with people participating in a virtual technology meeting? I mean, to a certain extent, we have been doing something like this in the past, but not to the scale of large conferences and events. What are your thoughts on that, Lynn?
Well, I can answer with two hats. One from what we're doing at the CAC, and also I'm vice chair of Choose Chicago. And in both, we're looking at all our events when we come back out of the pandemic as being a combination. We think that conferences, when we look at Choose Chicago and we look at conventions, We know that there's going to be a lot of conventioneers that are going to want to have a virtual experience instead of a physical experience. So how does that look? Not from a technological point only at, McCormick Place, but also from a revenue standpoint. So how do you, how do you add value to that so that you can charge for it? Because right now we haven't figured out the economic model for really virtual programming. And then with the CAC, we know that we're now reaching an audience all around the world. So we have people who want to take part in a program that we're offering from England or from India at the same time as we're offering it here. So we are even adjusting times of programs, and we're offering, how do we do that when we have a live program at the CAC, to know how do we do it live, because there's still that live component where people don't want to just watch a pre-recorded event. They want that dynamic interaction, just like today, of the live presentation and the speaker.
Lovely. Great point over there. Adrian, would love to get your thoughts over here. This is Colleen Egan who's asking a question, that we saw 7% of the folks from Illinois leave the state last year and work remote because it's become more acceptable. Others are moving into other cities or states, just for a better quality of life, weather, taxation, education, whatever the reason may be, right? How can our state, especially Chicago, rethink space to meet these new considerations in a post-COVID economy?
I think companies are going to have to be, it's all going to be flexible. Everything has to come down to flexibility. Chicago has so much to offer in this city. Like there's a reason that we all came here to begin with, and I think that the pandemic has taken a little bit of that away from us and our inability to get out and to enjoy the amazing restaurants that we have here and do the downtown shopping. But that stuff is going to come back. It might come back and it might look different, but it is going to come back. So it's hard to look at things long term. I think right now everybody's a little bit reactionary. So there is this exodus out of big cities, not just Chicago. So I think when companies are starting to look at returning to work, they're going to need to look at what's going to draw their employees back in. How can they offer different types of spaces that are going to give them something that they can't have, that people can't have at home? And what sort of amenities can they offer that they didn't have before? And there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach or like one answer. It's going to be different for every company, especially since they're all coming from a different place pre-pandemic, right? So like, what was their work from home policy before? What is it going to be afterwards? It's going to be different for everybody, and it's all going to come down to flexibility and giving people choice and giving people a reason to come back.
Great point. And talking about the reason to come back, right? So there is a personal reason, there is a professional reason, there is a citywide reason. One of our questions we got from Nurul, Eric, maybe this one's for you, is what are the implications of hybrid workplaces on transit real estate and on urban planning? What are some of the implications of this? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I guess I'm going to take that as meaning making space to create virtual connection. So I think we've started to look at some concepts around kind of the like a marketplace of ideas. So if you think about if you just added a few digital screens along the circulation corridors of an otherwise same office that you left, I don't think it's really achieving that. And especially what Tapi was saying, which is use technology in a way that kind of creates bridges to the virtual environment, whether it's AR, VR, or it's really just making sure those that choose to be in another place are still part of the conversation, part of the culture. And one thing I haven't heard a lot of talk about, but it's interesting, is that what do you do when you choose to be present in the office 5 days a week, and we're getting into a conversation around career ladder, and you're up for promotion, and someone else up for promotion, and you're there in front of your boss every day, and the other person's not. I think there's a lot of really difficult, HR and career growth conversations that we need to make sure we don't put the digital, barrier between opportunity for those people. So I think, to get to your question, we need to allocate space to create meaningful connections virtually if we're going to do that. It's not about the wormhole that we did one time for a client that was literally a static screen to Singapore, I believe. It's really about immersive experiences that are reciprocal, because otherwise you start to wonder why you do them.
Yeah, exactly. And somebody asked the question, well, we're talking about XR, but aren't we talking about physical spaces and personal connections? I just want to, I can talk about that, in that it's not A or B, it's A and B. It's how do you actually bring those together? And to that point, Toppy, do you think companies will need to consider incentives in order to bring people back to the office once the pandemic ends? Or do you think it's going to be intrinsic human nature, like Eric mentioned, right? It's, hey, if the person I'm competing with for this next job is in the office, I've got to be there. Or do you think we're going to need to create some sort of incentives to draw people back?
I think if we think about the purpose of the space, then the incentive kind of is inbuilt, right? So if we're talking about it being a space that you go to collaborate, or maybe you go to innovate and be creative, or if you need a space to do deep work, then that is the incentive in itself. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is the whole idea of like gamification, and how do you make spaces attractive to people? But I think if we're honest with ourselves and we rethink the purpose of this actual space, then what's the objective? Why would you need? I hear the point. I just guess I don't believe the incentive should be that an organization shouldn't have to create an incentive to drive people back, unless there's a clear objective for them going back to the space. I hear your point though, Eric, around the promotion though. And I think that with the democratization of power, I would like to think that, maybe I'm a bit too much of an idealist, but I would like to think that there would be this, I've noticed at least within my organization, this leveling of the playing field. It's not just about the people who are in the head office, or it's about the people who are in these strategic business offices. Actually, now your leadership team are more accessible. And I would hope that we would be a bit more conscious and active around kind of like maintaining that split in the
Great. Thanks, Toppy. Daniel Valentino, thank you so much for not only your Q&A questions, but even comments. Some of the things you're mentioning out here, very interesting, right? You've mentioned that ETH Denver apparently was the largest conference in Americas, a particular type of a conference. It was in Feb of 2020, and it is being hosted on a platform that is actually developed by an innovative startup right here in Chicago. Thanks for sharing that. And Daniel has a very targeted question, a couple of targeted questions for Adrian. He'd love to hear your comments on how quickly does CBRE expect tenants to return to the office? And then what is CBRE doing in terms of infrastructure to support remote work?
So we're seeing people go back already. It really varies depending on where they are in the country and how big the corporations are. We're seeing smaller companies start to go back already. I don't think that we're seeing anyone go back 100%. I think that's been said a few times now already. Everybody expects a little bit of change. So we're seeing a lot of hybrids. We're seeing a lot of work from home 2 days, work from home 3 days, or some of it's top down. Some of it they're giving their employees the option to choose how they want to work best moving forward. And then some of the larger corporations are not in any rush to get back. They're finding that they can work remotely, and they're taking the time right now to kind of pause, to reevaluate, to really listen to what their employees have to say and how things are working. We're doing a lot of workplace strategies and a lot of surveys for their employees so that they can go back and change the way that they're working in a new way. So there's not one answer. Again, everything is there's not a one size fits all. So we're seeing people come back now. We're seeing people who don't want to come back until the end of 2021.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. So Lynn, maybe one question to you, that how does this new space or place look like for new business opportunities and openings, specifically in Chicago? This was a question posed earlier by Latoya Clay. So how does this new space place concept look like for new business opportunities, new openings in Chicago? Oh, Lynn, you're on mute.
I think we're still learning. If, back, I remember, back last April, we were all sitting and saying, okay, when people return to the office in June, what's that look like? What's that new environment? And we spent a lot of time drawing 16-foot circles around employees and where they were going to walk and what the direction was. I think this is a very organic process. And I think we are going to learn as people start coming back and understanding where the opportunities are and where the vacancies are. And I think that they will continue to evolve, so that I think the thing we have to look forward to is be comfortable with taking risk and trying stuff. And I think that with this whole experiment that we've had the last year, we've changed the way we do our business. And it's gonna involve when people start coming back into the office, like Adrian said, and we're gonna find out, are there vacant spots? Where do they have to be used? And what's the opportunity for new businesses?
Great, wonderful. So as we all eagerly anticipate a return to our spaces and places, whatever those may be, can each of you in less than 30 seconds leave us with one piece of advice that will help us prepare for the post-pandemic future? Maybe Toppy, we start with you.
Sure. I would say extend grace to yourself and to others. And also not to defer happiness. Probably one of the things that has annoyed me about this COVID pandemic we're in now is I planned to be in Italy with my sister last year, it didn't happen. So not to defer happiness, really live in the moment, but also extend grace to yourself and to others. A great future is like a series of great todays.
So well said there, Toppy. Eric, try to top that one.
Yeah, that was way more poetic than I'm capable of. I think we're all seeking really quick solutions, and I think right now we're in a moment where our culture and what's unique to us really needs to come forward. And so I would really encourage everyone, not because it's good for my business, but spend the time around the discovery of what will work, and then be willing to change it when it doesn't. And I think there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and the change that we're all experiencing is going to be that much more frequent and fluid. So we need to be willing to pivot and tweak and adjust along the way.
Change is the only constant. Exactly, Eric. That's the motto I live by. Lynn, any words of advice?
Yeah, I almost think it's like with lean manufacturing, you do something, you talk together, and then you adjust, and then you try it again. So I think we're almost like in a giant lean manufacturing experiment. We're going to, just like Eric said, we're going to try something. It's not going to work. We're going to collaborate, and we're going to tweak it. But it's really a time of experimentation.
Very true. Experimentation. And that's what Toppy does on a daily basis. That's what I do for my job from an innovation standpoint. And great advice there, Lynn, is experiment from a life perspective. Adrian, any words of advice?
Yeah, much of the same. Be kind right now. Everybody's going through a lot. So we're in a unique position where we can take a step back. We can reevaluate, we can listen to what our employees need. It's definitely not going to be a switch that we flip and everything just goes back to the way it was before. There's going to be a long period of transition. So, let's take the time and do it the right way.
Great. This has been such a lively discussion. I would like to thank again each and every one of our panelists for their time, and the Chicago Innovation team for organizing this. Before I hand it off to Paul, would like to leave all of you with one thought. Place is security. Space is freedom, right? We are attached to one and we long for the other. So here's to finding your own spaces and creating memories in your own places. Paul, back to you.
Thank you, Shivani, and thank you, Toppy, Eric, Lynn, Adrian. What an insightful discussion about the future, what really matters to us as really as human beings. Not just as workers, but holistically as humans who have a variety of needs from both our physical and virtual spaces and places. I feel like this conversation could have just kept going on and on and on, and seeing all the questions coming through the Q&A really is an indication of that. Well, the good news is we are going to continue this for 15 minutes for networking, so you can continue those conversations. But first, just a few closing comments. First, as part of Chicago Innovation's 20th anniversary year, we have by far our biggest slate of events. You can find them all on our website, including our next event, which is on February 11th, called Rising Together, the story of Chicago's innovation ecosystem. We hope all of you can attend. And then secondly, for those in the audience who are not already members of Chicago Innovation, we invite you to consider becoming one, which includes an array of members-only opportunities, and you can learn more about that on our site as well. So now, to close out today's events, we would like to invite you all to join for an optional 15 minutes of networking in breakout groups, so you can get to know some of today's fellow attendees, because we always say that Chicago Innovation events is not just the speakers, but it's the attendees that really make our community special. Share your own thoughts with your peers on this space and place topic in these breakouts. To attend the networking portion, we will momentarily be sending out a link in the Zoom chat that will take you into separate Zoom meetings where you'll be broken off into groups of 5 people or so. Here are 2 discussion starters for each group, though you can talk about whatever you want, but here's just 2 suggestions. First, introduce yourself. And then secondly, talk about what decisions and concerns that you're currently dealing with that relates to today's Space First Place conversation. So now you can please go ahead and click the Zoom link in the chat that I see was just sent out. Thank you, Paul. The networking session, it will start in just 1 to 2 minutes after you click the link. So thank you again. Great job, speakers, and we'll see you in the breakout groups.